Yo ho ho, welcome back to another video. I hope you're keeping well. Thank you for joining me. So today I'm going to be talking you through all the books that I'm planning to read over the autumn period, and I've probably picked out far too many books, but I'm being very optimistic because I've gotten back into the habit of reading every day. So if I stick to that, I shouldn't have any issue at all getting through this absolutely massive stack of books. So the first book that I'm planning to read over the autumn period is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is probably one of the most anticipated books of the year for a lot of people. And from the reviews that I've seen so far, it seems that people who are genuinely into dark academia for the academic side of things, or because they're academics themselves, really love this book. And then the people who are more interested in dark academia for the aesthetic reasons don't seem to really like this book all that much. So I have a feeling that I'm going to absolutely love it because I am quite academic. That was the most shocking thing from doing a degree, was that it turns out I've actually got something up here sometimes. This book is set in 1828 and our main character is a Chinese boy called Robin, and he's brought from China to London by this professor. So he ends up studying at Oxford University's Royal Institute of Translation, where he studies languages. And in this book, language is an incredibly important element, as translation is able to be manifested into some sort of magical working referred to as silver working. So they're able to get some sort of magical power through the act of translation, and basically it comes off to me as knowledge is power. So the British Empire are using this method of magic in order to gain more power and to colonialize everything that they come into contact with. And Robin's own conflict comes from when Britain ends up going to war with China, and he has all this inner worries about what he should do as what is right by his own country, or should he be supporting where he's been taught and educated and all that kind of thing. So I think this is going to be an incredibly deep, meaningful read. I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth stuck into it. Next, I'm going to be reading My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So this is the story of a 15-year-old girl who is at boarding school, and she is groomed to be in a sexual relationship with her 40-something-year-old male teacher. And it jumps back and forth in time periods from her 15-year-old self to her current older self, as in the current time frame, other girls are making allegations against this teacher, and it forces Vanessa to go back into her past and really examine that relationship and whether or not she views herself as a victim or not. And I think the whole idea of consent and victimhood is a really interesting concept, specifically from the victim's point of view. So I know this might be kind of heavy and dark and twisted and stuff, but I'm also just kind of interested in it for the psychological aspect. So I really made the effort to go all out with picking out dark, depressing reads for autumn because, you know, it's the time of year for it. So naturally, I'm going to be reading A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. So this is a book that people have been telling me to read for years based on the fact that you know that I like reading dark, depressing stories where things don't work out for characters and all that kind of thing. I remember the reviews of this at the time when it was published, and I wasn't really impressed by what people on BookTube had to say about it. Some people were just like, this seems to be taking advantage of people. This seems to be like torture porn. People were saying that they didn't see the point of it even being written. There was some very kind of critical reviews of this at the time. Over time, obviously, it's blown up because of TikTok and all that kind of thing. So I'm just going to give it a go and see how I fare with it. This is the story of 4 friends who have finished college and moved to New York, and they basically have nothing but their friendship and their ambition. And you think, wow, that's such a story, you know, that kind of like down and out sort of poor starving artist sort of vibe, but you've got nothing but your friends to keep you going. That sounds kind of like it might be enlightening. Wrong. So there's one particular character in this who has a lot of childhood trauma and seemingly is dragged down throughout the rest of his life by the events that have happened in his past, but also events that are going to happen in his future. I think it's basically like everything bad that can happen to you as a person happens to this character. It's just known as a book that destroys people when they read it. I'm interested to see if it will destroy me, since I'm a hollowed out husk of a human being and nothing makes me feel things anymore, so since I'm picking out all these depressing books, I need a little bit of like filler in between some of them. Something, you know, a bit uplifting so I don't completely ruin my mental health. So I'm going to be picking up Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe. This is the second book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. I read the first one earlier this year and it has been one of my favourite books so far. I absolutely adored it. It was so charming and just such a wonderful reading experience that I just want to re-experience that all over again, and that's what I'm planning to do with this. This is about a coffee shop in Tokyo. It is kind of just hidden away, a hole in the wall type of place, but supposedly there is a seat in there that once you sit in it and have a cup of coffee, you're able to travel back in time. And there are a whole heap of rules that one has to abide by in order to travel back in time. One of the most important ones being that whoever you're going to visit has to have had visited this cafe. So I really, really want to pick this book up as soon as possible, but I'm going to hold off as best as I can to specifically read it after something that I may have found depressing. Next, I'm going to be picking up a book that I've been meaning to read for absolute years. I'm expecting nothing short of 4 or 5 stars from this. I am like really anticipating that it's going to be incredible from everything that I know about it. It is IRobot by Isaac Asimov. So what I know about this is that originally it was a series of short stories that have been edited into a more linear narrative. There are multiple reoccurring characters, and it basically gets into the ethics of AI and what happens when robots start questioning their creators. And it just sounds like it's going to be absolutely incredible, and I probably will continue to read more Isaac Asimov if I do end up really enjoying this. But yeah, I didn't want to get too deep into the basic plot synopsis because I didn't want to spoil it on myself, because I've never seen the film adaptation or anything like that, so I'm going into it completely blind. So I think that's another element that's really going to like boost my reading experience. Next I have If We Were Villains by ML Rio. So this is this author's first book, and to be honest, I bought it for a somewhat, I don't know, I feel like it's probably like a somewhat shitty reason. I thought the blurb was incredibly funny and ridiculous, so I bought it. This is about a man named Oliver who has just gotten out of prison after serving 10 years for a murder that he may or may not have committed. And the detective on the case who put him away is the first one to greet him once he leaves the prison. And he basically wants to find out now that, you know, that it's gone through the process of the trial and the process of the jailing and all that. Only now the detective wants to find out whether or not Oliver actually committed this murder, and he wants to find out what really happened on that night. And you're just like, what an asshole. What an asshole this guy is. The audacity. So that's why I picked it up, because I was like, that just sounds ridiculous. That sounds mad. Then I have the second or fourth, depending on how you view it, book in the Witcher series, The Time of Contempt by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is, again, another really anticipated read for me. I had to really hold off from binging the entire series when I read The Blood of Elves earlier this year, because I loved that book so much. Again, another favourite. And I know that this book in particular is actually a lot of fans' favourite in the series, so I'm anticipating a lot from it. The story continues on with Geralt, Yennefer and Ciri, and Ciri's ongoing protection and education, but it also delves into the waging war with Nilfgaard, and it definitely gets more into the political side of things from what I can tell from reviews that I've read. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this. I'm going to be picking it up quite soon because I can't help myself. I can't stay away. Then to get into some spookier reads, I picked up The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. Now I know that a lot of people who are fans of Grady Hendrix have said that this isn't the strongest work from him, but I thought the plot sounded pretty interesting. It's about a group of women who all individually have survived horrific violent attacks and attempted murders by various spree killers / serial killers, and they formed a support group in order to deal with, or try to deal with, these events, how their past trauma is being monetized by not only people making movie adaptations about their lives, writing books about it, and how they have to continuously deal with it. Like, they can't just put these events behind them. It's continuously shaping their current circumstances. One of the girls from the group ends up being murdered, and our main character believes that someone is out to get them to finish off the work that all these other killers couldn't do. So I think that's an interesting plot. Like, I'm not expecting a whole heap from it. I just want to be entertained. There's some horror stories that I'm like, I really want to be scared. I don't think I'm really going to get that from this because, I don't know, serial killers, spree killers, all that kind of thing doesn't really move my needle all that much. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading something just a little bit cheesy and something that's an homage to horror fans and slasher films. Then I have The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Now, is it autumn if you're not reading a Donna Tartt book? I don't think so. So I have tried to read this before. You will probably recognize it from at least 2 other TBRs that I've done over the years. I've definitely tried to read it and I just didn't really get very far with it. Since then, I've watched a couple of reviews. I've gotten a bit more knowledgeable about what the plot's about, and I feel like that's definitely going to help when I read it this time around, because I am going to read it and finish it. So this is about a 13-year-old boy who is the survivor of a terrorist attack which claims the life of his mother. And this is the event that really shapes how the rest of his life turns out. And he's sent to live with a family friend. And it's basically a coming of age story that explores codependent relationships, trauma, alienation, and the kind of severe psychological effects that can happen when losing a parent in such a violent way. I know it's meant to be dark, and I think it's meant to be a bit creepy too, but I know that when you actually read all 3 of her currently published books, you're able to see some sort of correlation between them that you can only see once you've read them all. So I'm interested to see what that's all about as well. Then I'm planning to read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is another fairly chunky book. But I'm not going to let that stop me. Every time I have gone into a bookshop ever since this has been published, I habitually pick this up and stare at it and say, I want to buy this book. I want to read this book. And now that the sequel is coming out next year, that's what made me pull the trigger and finally get it. The plot sounds like a little bit stereotypical when it comes to the tropes of fantasy. I'm hoping that with the spin of women being at the forefront of the story, that will kind of take it up a notch and make it stand out. So from what I can tell from the synopsis, and like, I didn't want to spoil this on myself whatsoever, but I think it follows various different women in this world. So we have a queen, an outsider of the court, whatever that means, and a dragon rider. And I'm assuming their lives are going to probably become all intertwined, but I think the main aspect is that the queen needs to have an heir, and she's currently unwed, and there's all this like fuss about her having an heir, but there's also assassins who are currently being sent after her because naturally someone in the kingdom wants to overthrow her. There is this evil thing that is referred to as the Nameless One who may return, and I just think something called the Nameless One just sounds metal and badass. So I'm hoping it can deliver on that aspect. Really don't know what I'm going to make of this, but looking forward to delving into it. A little bit more dark academia now. I have Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I didn't pick this up for the longest time because I was under the assumption that it was YA because I just associated the author with YA novels, and it turns out this is her first adult novel. So yeah, I kind of slept on it for a while, and again, the sequel to this is coming out next year, so I have seen this doing the rounds all over again on Instagram, and it's been very much at the forefront of my algorithm, so I ended up deciding to pick it up. So our main character in this is Alex, and she is a high school dropout, and she kind of is a burnout for a couple of years. She gets into, you know, having too many boyfriends and doing drugs and this and that. Ultimately, it leads to an event of which she is the sole survivor of a multiple homicide. And when she's recovering in hospital, she's offered an opportunity to attend a prestigious university and to basically get her life back on track. And when she gets to college, she finds out there's a much darker undertone happening here, and people are getting invested in occult activities and dark magic and all that sort of thing. So it sounds interesting. It sounds different from the stereotypical dark academia that I've read so far. Again, I'm not expecting this to really move my needle all that much. I just pretty much want to be entertained. If this is something that can tide me over for a time that like I might be struggling with a potential reading slump or something like that, you know, something that's not super serious, something that's like fun and dark and maybe a little bit twisted. That's good enough for me. And then finally, the last book that I'm planning to read over autumn is one that I'm super excited for. It is Count Magnus and Other Ghost Stories by M.R. James. So M.R. James is an incredibly influential author when it comes to ghost stories. I've heard nothing but great things said about his writing style and the stories that he wrote. So I'm really, really eager to get into this, to have another potentially new favourite horror author. I'm really looking forward to the short story Casting the Runes, because I think that sounds like something that is just up my alley pretty much, and the fact that it went on to inspire the Curse of the Demon film. I'm looking forward to seeing the influence and the ripple effect and being able to identify the other stories or horror films that I've watched over the years and being like, oh, they pull that from M.R. James' story, you know, stuff like that. I think that's like my favourite thing, is kind of basically looking for Easter eggs when it comes to reading influential works. Very much excited to get into this, and I haven't really been reading that many classics this year as well, so that's another reason why I'm excited. So that has been my autumn TBR. Let me know if you're planning to read any of the same books that I am, or if you've already read some of them. Let me know your thoughts, and of course let me know what you're planning to read over the autumn period, because it's just such a wonderful time of year for reading. When that weather changes and it gets a little bit chillier, it's just the perfect time to hunker down with a good book, and that's what I'm hoping to do this autumn. So if you want to keep up with what I'm reading outside of YouTube, you can always follow me on my Instagram. I post regular updates of what I'm reading and my thoughts on my stories. And you can also add me as a friend on Goodreads or on Storygraph. I update those as frequently as I remember to do, basically. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.